Jade huffs in frustration but unlocks the door, allowing the demons into her home. Amon sets a bag of fried chicken on the table and busies himself dividing items onto plates. Seth takes in the side of the small apartment and lets out a whistle.
Is this what all humans live in?
He looks curiously at Jade, who shakes her head with a heavy sigh.
It's nothing extravagant, but it's enough for me. I don't want very much, just a quiet place to call my own. I work a lot, so having a big house to take care of would be tedious. This city doesn't exactly have a lot of housing options either. This was the closest place to the lab, and it's walking distance, so I don't even need a car. For me, it's perfect.
Don't be ungrateful, Zeth.
Amon hisses.
That's rich, telling a demon to be grateful. We're not seriously staying here, are we?
Amon glares at him, but Jade interrupts before the two can argue further.
Who said you would be staying here?
Jade crosses her arms in protest.
I bet this is still better than whatever part of hell you crawled out of.
She turns her nose up to Zeth as he rubs his arm sheepishly. Truth be told, his living quarters in the dark room was an elaborate palace. Comparatively, the stinky little apartment was a far cry from habitable in his eyes. He looks away from her as he thinks back to his home in the other realm and sighs.
I'm not complaining, I just wasn't expecting such a pathetic home.
Amon sets the plates on the table as the trio gathers to eat.
I need to tell you something.
Jade finally says, breaking the awkward silence. Zeth and Amon exchange glances before giving her a questioning look. She pushes the food around her plate, wondering how to tell them about Luke. She didn't want them to hurt Luke, but she also didn't want Luke to cause any trouble. If she flat out told Amon that the museum keeper possessed a slide with something that looked like his eyes, he might just charge out of here and straight to Luke. There was nothing she would be able to do to stop him either, even if she had the strength. With his burning skin, there was no way she could even touch him. She shudders as she thinks about Luke being burnt to ash and swallows hard.
When I went to the museum earlier, the curator showed me something strange.
Jade pauses, not sure how she can put her words so no one would be in danger.
Strange how?
Amon questions, leaning towards her with interest. She eyes him wearily, studying the swimming embers in his eyes.
I don't know what it is exactly, but he showed me a slide that had microbes that are the same color as your eyes.
She says as she drops her gaze to the table, her body tensing in preparation of an expected outburst from Amon. He leans back in his chair, looking away from her with a bored expression. To her surprise, he was the least bit concerned. Did he not understand what she was telling him? Seth chuckles as he let out a sigh of relief, leaving Jade thoroughly confused.
Isn't that a bad thing?
She questions in great concern, but Amon shakes his head as Seth continues to laugh. Jade's face scrunches in confused anger.
Why are you acting like this isn't a big deal? This means there is at least one other person outside the lab that knows about you.
Her voice grows louder with concern, as though speaking in a higher volume would somehow make them understand.
It's not a big deal,
Seth says, but Jade falls back in her chair sadly.
What are you so worried about? We'll collect the slide and make the mortal forget about it.
Amon responds, then calmly continues to eat his meal. At least he wasn't upset, but she had expected an angry response, not this calm demeanor from him.
I don't want to lose the only friends I have.
She blinks away her confusion after a moment and sulks down in her chair. Seth and Amon's eyes dart in her direction. In all of time, no mortal had ever regarded them as friends. Somehow, that thought alone made them feel as though they must protect this sad little mortal girl. Amon couldn't decide if the feeling was annoying or not, but the desire to know about Jade seemed to override all other thoughts. He forces a smile to his lips before speaking.
I can see why you feel it is important, kitten. It's just that this isn't exactly an immediate threat. Just finish your food, and let us worry about our own troubles.
She sighs. He was right. She hadn't eaten since late the night before and was indeed very hungry.
We can't seriously be the only friends you have.
Seth inquires, however. His curiosity quickly dies when he sees the sadness on Jade's face.
You told me before, you don't even have family come over. Am I correct to assume you are alone in that manner as well?
Amon asks her, ignoring her unpleasant disposition. Jade clicks her tongue, a flash of rage crossing her features. What family did she have to speak of? Those pieces of shit didn't care about her one bit, and were most likely having a grand time without her. Her fists clench and whiten as she thinks about them.
My parents were terrible. Mom was never home, and Dad was an abusive drunk. If they couldn't blame each other for their problems, it became my fault.
Jade suddenly becomes quiet and looks up, shaking off the anger.
Anyway, that's a long and unpleasant story.
Seth and Amon exchange a glance, unsure whether to press for more information. Jade folds her arms, thinking about her parents angered her. She hadn't thought of her past in a very long time and was sure she was up to talk about it. As the two men across from her quietly stared at her, she suddenly felt obligated to explain further. Jade sighs sadly. Talking about this now would only upset her, and she knew it. Alas, the men did seem like they would drop the matter.
I was adopted. I think that's why my parents were so cruel. At first it was just my parents arguing, sometimes at one another, and sometimes at me. Then Mom stopped coming home. She would stay away for weeks, even months at a time. That's when the physical violence started. Dad would lash out at her when she did come home. On the days she did not, I was his target.
Jade rubs a small white scar on her forearm as she recalls her trauma.
By the time I was 8, I understood what was happening. Mom was seeing someone else, and although she was married to my father, there was no love between them. Eventually, the new guy Mom was seeing ended things, but not before getting her hooked on heroin. As I'm sure you can imagine, this didn't make my situation better. From 8 to 13, I was beaten daily and went without food most days.
Jade closes her eyes, trying not to relive the memories as she explains her past. Amon and Seth lean in, rage pulsing through them unexpectedly. It could be said that demons love these types of humans the best. The type of mortal that inflicts unjustified pain onto others would be a damned soul they could inflict nameless punishments upon in the dark realm. However, this was the first time they experienced a first-hand account from a victim, and the fact that this torture was inflicted upon Jade made both the demons' blood boil.
When I'd started to, develop,
Jade outlines her figure as the men nod in understanding.
My father tried to sell me on more than one occasion. He eventually handed me off to some random guy. When I was 13, the guy did not have any malicious intention. He actually tried to help me.
Jade pauses, noticing Amon tense. Although she knew he wasn't angry with her, seeing him tense up made her nervous. On the other hand, Amon had a sudden urge to hug her, though he could not explain the emotion. He'd been curious as to why she was alone, but now he was regretting asking. His blood seethed in his veins. Humans had to be the most vicious beings in the world to treat their own children in such a way. Even wild beasts know better than to mistreat their own young. Jade sat quietly for a moment, unsure if she should continue. Seeing Amon tense up made her uncomfortable. An image of a shadow demon exploding into flames and her home, as well as herself perishing in the fire, flashes through her mind. She shudders at the thought, silently deciding she should stop talking. Amon relaxes a bit. Understanding his presence had made her uncertain. Seth glances towards Amon knowingly before his eyes are drawn back to Jade. He pats the top of her hand, snapping Jade free of the image in her mind.
So, what happened after that?
Seth questions in a calm, low voice, doing his best to reassure her.
He wanted to adopt me.
Amon's shoulders relax a little, giving Jade a bit of relief.
I didn't know that back then though, so I ran away. A few weeks later, I was picked up by a cop and placed in a group home. I refused to tell them who I was, and obviously, my parents didn't report me missing. Things only got worse from there. I ran away from the home shortly after I arrived. Kids can be far crueler than anyone else, especially kids that have been through a hard time.
Jade falls silent again as she thinks back to the horrors she endured in the home. Amon huffs in frustration, looking away from Jade.
They're all the same. Mortals can be too cruel,
he says in quiet rage as Seth sadly nods in agreement.
Hey, I don't need your pity, okay? This is exactly why I didn't want to talk about it. I don't need the two of you treating me like a charity case.
Jade says as she pushes her plate away from her, folding her arms and looking away from them. Why did they want to know about her past anyway? It's not like it was something they could fix. So what if she had shitty parents? She was doing just fine now. Amon's eyes trail back to her. She'd been broken long ago, and by her expression it was clear to him she'd never fully recovered. She may be moving forward, and those people have nothing to do with her now, but the damage was there, and the scars left were old and ugly. He leans forward with a serious expression.
We don't pity you, Jade. In fact, I think you're rather impressive. Despite your problems, here you are, facing down a couple of demons with a pretty strong gusto.
Amon lets a faint smile cross his lips when Jade's attention falls back to him in surprise. She hadn't expected to receive respect for overcoming her past.
It's kind of strange. I mean, we know of all kinds of terrible stories, but somehow, hearing you explain it personally is difficult to stomach.
Seth says while he pokes at the food on his plate. Neither wanted to hear any more, but both demons had a great curiosity to learn more about this mortal.
How did you survive after you left the group home?
Seth questioned quietly, already regretting the words as they fell from his mouth. Jade only shrugs as she drops her gaze back to her plate.
I just kept going. I guess I just accepted my life would be cursed and tried to make the best of things.
Amon contemplates her words as he watches her wearily. The more she said, the more he grew worried. She was not as strong as she looked. He started to wonder if this girl was waiting around to die. Maybe this was why she was willing to work for a company that would kill her for leaking information. Amon closes his eyes as he thinks. He rarely made deals with mortals himself, though the few times he had were over matters like this. Those who wanted to forget and live a happy, carefree life. He opens his eyes again to study Jade. Would she also ask him for this eventually?
Humans have a saying, if it is too good to be true, it usually is.
Jade says with a huff.
At the time, I started living at school. No one knew I was there, and I could use the gym showers to clean myself. Then everything changed.
Jade felt tears whelm in her eyes before dropping from her face. She continued, much to the dismay of the demons before her.
A boy approached me one day and showed me a video of me undressing at the school. I don't know how he knew I was there, but he tried to.
Jade's words fall silent as the tears spill from her eyes.
A janitor had been recording me the whole year and selling the videos to perverts online.
Jade pulls her knees into her chest, making herself appear small in the chair, as if trying to protect herself against the memory, rambling lifelessly, as if in a trance, recalling her past.
That boy thought I was selling myself, so he came to school early. He found me while I was undressing. He said he'd be gentle, but when I refused, he got upset. He forced me to the floor and held me there while he started to undress himself. Then suddenly, the janitor stopped him. He chased the kid away and handed me a towel. When I thanked him, he smiled and said his videos would be ruined if he let someone steal my virginity. He left me like that on the floor, dazed, confused, and feeling violated. It was then I realized why so many at school hated me. They all had seen those videos and they all thought poorly of me. I was kicked out shortly after that. No one believed that I wasn't selling myself.
Amon closes his eyes, attempting to quiet the disturbed rage that filled his being.
My apologies for making you relive those events. I didn't expect it to be something so grotesque.
He studies her blank gaze, eyes filled with endless tears. Slowly he raised a hand towards her for only a moment before pulling back. There was nothing he could do to comfort her, aside from leaving her in peace. He clenches his fists angrily, once again halted by his own abilities.
I think I'll go out for a bit,
he says before leaving Jade and Seth alone. As soon as the door closes, Seth rises and pulls Jade from her chair into his arms. He holds her tightly, slowly petting the back of her head as she cries into his chest. In his arms, she seemed lifeless. If not for the endless flow of tears, Seth would seriously question if Jade was alive at all. She rested the side of her face against his shoulder, looking into nothing for a moment before she felt coolness around her. Understanding made its way into her mind and she finally snapped out of herself. Jade's face scrunched and she buried herself into Seth's embrace. How had she ended up like this? Embraced and comforted by a demon. She tosses her head slowly to rid her mind of all thoughts. It no longer mattered how things ended up this way. She had long ago accepted some things in life just are, and nothing can be done about it. Feeling that her sobs had subsided a little, Seth quietly speaks to her.
Hush, it's going to be all right. Stop crying. You're ruining your image, you know? You survived, only to break down and cry about it now?
Seth fails at trying to make light of the situation. He places firm hands on her shoulders to push her back slightly, gazing at her with a warm smile. Using the sleeve of his sweater, he wipes away her tears, but when they don't stop, he pulls her close again.
Don't worry too much, Jade. Things can't get worse. It's not too good to be true. We're demons. It doesn't get any worse than us, okay? Stop crying, please.
He tells her softly, feeling her nod. She clung tightly to his chest as her tears subside, leaving a pounding headache in their wake. She rubs her head against him, causing him to push her back again to look at her face.
Are you okay?
He questions her. Jade half sighs and laughs.
That's kind of a stupid question.
She responds, looking away. Seth rubs the top of her head again, not knowing what else to do as she sighs.
It's not like it killed me.
she manages to say as she wipes the remaining tears from her face.
After getting kicked out, I crossed paths with Dr. Foster. He was in the coffee shop reading over some ancient scripture. I've always loved puzzles, and historical artifacts are littered with them. When I questioned him about the paper, he was shocked that I could read it, and offered me a job right then and there, and well, here we are.
Seth nods, grateful the rest of her life hadn't been so bad. Jade looks to the uneaten food on her plate. Her body felt weak, but she didn't have the appetite to eat now.
I'm tired,
she says softly, rubbing at the pain in her temples. Crying had given her an unrelenting headache. Even though she was not sleepy, she wanted to lie down until the pain was gone. Seth squeezes her shoulder and smiles.
It's okay. Go lay down for a bit. I'll clean this up.
She nods sadly as she makes her way to her room, closing the door behind her. Seth stares at the door, suddenly understanding that she has not been better off even now. She lived in such a place all alone. Dare he say, he felt his heart ache for her. Seth looks back to the table with a huff. There was a heavy weight in his chest from the story Jade had told them. He never would have guessed she had such a horrible life. Her indifference, however, was better understood now. He promises her silently that he'd make sure to avenge her when those souls end up in the dark realm.